Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our LinkedIn Live, where we're going to be covering new sourcing models for an agile world, the learnings from DNB. So I really appreciate everyone being here today. First of all, please feel free to comment at any point in the comment section. If you've got any questions, anything that we've not covered into the depth you need, then please let us know. And also, we'd love to know, just as a warm-up, where people are based, because we love to understand how global the audience are, because it sometimes can help us to really focus the content in terms of any specific learnings we have for any particular geo. So if you could please put in the comments where you're based, that would really help us to make sure that we're covering the globe in terms of some of our input. So first of all, let me get the boring stuff out of the way, and let's do the Everest Group introductions. So Ricky, can you start with an introduction of yourself, please?
Hi everyone, Ricky Sundrani this side, Vice President with the Pricing Assurance team at Everest Group. Very happy to be on the call today. Been with Everest Group for 8.5 years, and this is my first LinkedIn Live, so very excited about it.
Thanks, Ricky. I didn't know it was your first one, so we'll go gentle with you. Hi, everyone. I'm David Rickard. I'm a Vice President here at Everest Group as well, based in the UK. I lead a lot of our work on sourcing, vendor management, outsourcing and procurement. I've been with Everest Group just under 2 years now. Prior to that, though, I'd been in a consulting role where I led an outsourcing practice, and I was also a senior procurement director at Microsoft for nearly 18 years. I was at Microsoft doing outsourcing and procurement. So hopefully we've got some good insights that we can give you. But what we really wanted to also do is get you hear from someone who's actually in the industry and is actually a real practitioner. So we asked Robin to come along, and I'll give a little bit of background in a minute about why we asked Robin to come along. But Robin, maybe you could just do a brief intro to yourself and DNB, and that would be great for our audience.
Yeah, thanks, David. My name is Robin Oberst, and I work in DNB. And I've worked with sourcing, tech strategy, and things like that for the last probably 10 or so years. DNB is a bank in Norway. It is the largest bank in Norway by some considerable margin. So when we're feeling very Norwegian, we think we're quite a big bank. When we're thinking internationally, we think, well, maybe we're not quite such a big bank. And when we compare ourselves to the big tech giants, we realize we are, in fact, a very, very small player in a very, very big pond. But even though we're a small player, we are a bank from, as we like to say, R to O, or A to Z, for those of you without the letter O in your alphabet, which means we deliver all types of banking services. So we deliver retail services, corporate services, we deliver insurance, we deliver markets, wealth management, etc. So we have a very broad spectrum of services we deliver. And in terms of technologies, I could probably say we're also a bank that is A to Z in terms of technologies. We have most technologies here. That's us.
Brilliant. Thank you, Robin. And just to give the audience a bit of background how this came about. So Ricky and I had the pleasure of seeing Robin present at a conference a couple of months ago in Copenhagen. And he did a really good job and actually got a lot of the audience interested. And he was talking about how DNB have had to move on in their sourcing approach. And we get a lot of questions quite often from our audience around Agile and Agile procurement and using more of a DevOps model. And Robin used quite a few of those words as well in his presentation. So we were just really interested to understand a little bit about, so what are DNB doing to be, as the title of the session talks about, how are they adapting their sourcing models for an agile world? So we're not going to be talking today about agile in its truest sense of what agile means, but we're going to be talking about how procurement and sourcing can adapt to be more agile, I'm guessing, and that will obviously become apparent as we go. So I'm just going to ask Robin in a minute to cover us a little bit more detail about the journey that DNB have been on. But just in terms of who we've got on the audience, it's great to see we have a number of people from Europe. We've got Poland. We've got Switzerland, we've got Norway, we've also got quite a few people in the US, San Francisco, New Jersey, we've also got Egypt. We've got someone who's got no sound. Hopefully, Julian, that's been fixed for you. Most people seem to have sound, so hopefully it's not a systemic issue. And we also have people in India as well. So I think we've got a really good global audience, which is great news, actually, and a lot of interesting conversations that we can have. So first of all, Robin, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about sort of what the journey was that you have been on in DNB, and why you feel that you had to sort of make some changes in the sourcing model. And maybe if we can bring the first slide up.
Yeah, so let's just address that word there, journey. We talked just before coming on that it's such a cliche to talk about a journey, and when we say we're on a journey, very often that's management speak for an excuse for not actually having got anywhere. Well, we're still on the journey. That's very nice. Well, when are you actually going to get somewhere? But why I think to talk about journey is important is when I think of any strategy process. We're very focused on where we're going, but any strategy, any journey that you take is as much defined by where you start as where you're going. And that first steps that you take on that journey are just as much defined by that. So I think it is quite good to talk about that. For us, our journey, we've been outsourcing services since well before I joined the bank. I think back in 2000 we were sourcing infrastructure services. The story I picked up in Copenhagen was from about 2013, 2014, when we expanded the breadth of the services that we used, particularly into the application space. And that's when we really defined our sourcing model that we established there. I can say that a little bit about that in the next slide. But as we move forward towards now, 2018, we started to realize we needed to adapt the way we work, and therefore we needed a different sourcing model to support that. And that evolution goes forward into the future. But the model that we introduced in 2012, 2013, 2014 was the one that you see here, what we call a horizontal model. We separate services very cleanly. We have application development, we have application maintenance, we have application operations, and we have infrastructure services. Very well defined, very clear borders, or we try to make very clear borders between those services, and all of those delivered as managed services, except perhaps for the development work, which is project-based, funded as a project and ordered from our vendors. So very much we order, you deliver model, very clear, very boxy, one size fits all. And it's a good model. It brought us increased stability, reduced cost. What's not to like about this model? And the truth is,
Robin, sorry to interrupt. I mean, so firstly, I'd like to just sort of encourage the audience if you've got any questions, but it'd also be great if the audience if you're in a sourcing or procurement role, maybe chip in terms of how your model compares to this. Are you still in this type of model? Are you not planning to change? So please interact via the chat in terms of your reactions of what Robin's talking about, any questions, but also how maybe your model compares. Sorry, Robin, go ahead. I just wanted to get the audience thinking there.
No, that's fine. That's fine. It's a very classic model, and as I say, very good for many things. But come 4 or 5 years later, 6 years later, 2018, we realised that there are in fact, a number of things that we struggle with in this model. This separation, this horizontal separation, leads to fragmentation. I think you could probably go on to the next slide there, David. It's got some of these things on it. So this fragmentation can create a lack of ownership, a lack of end-to-end and overall ownership. We had different vendors in different layers that created, or it helped create some sort of blame game. And we lack synergies between those layers. The project-based funding model, we all love projects. Everyone loves projects, but a good project manager will scope. He will scope tightly, and he will exclude everything from outside his scope. And that's the same with the managed services. They're scoped, and everything is outside there doesn't get included. The result is that there are tasks that fall outside projects. And how do we do those? If we do everything on a project, we miss some things. It's also
Robin, Mallory from the audience has had a question actually, which is probably a good time to address this now, which is what's the difference between your horizontal model and the managed service model? So it maybe is now a good time to sort of maybe address that question.
So it's the same model, the horizontal model. This is a set of managed services. So we have a managed service, or we did at this time have a managed application maintenance service. We had a managed service for application operations. We had a managed service for infrastructure services. It was probably, in truth, it was a set of managed services within those layers. As I say, development slightly different. That was more on a project-based model. So a series of small managed services, if you like, up and coming. So this was the overall framework we used at that time. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does. Brilliant. Thank you, Robin.
But again, in terms of projects are great, but when you source projects, you source people, you onboard people, you finish the project. What happens when you finish the project? You offboard those people. Now, we all know that something else is going to happen. So 3 months later, we have another project in the same area. We re-onboard people, and it's new people. So we lose a lot of continuity. Business gets very frustrated that they're talking to new people. So this was one of our big stress points. And the other thing that we all know that I'm sure everyone else struggles with technical debt. Technical debt is the biggest consumer of budget known to man. It eats budget for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. In this model, it was very difficult, again, because of the restrictions of projects, to address and take full responsibility for technical debt. So we ended up having a last-minute project to deal with technical debt. And simply put, in the managed services, the black box that is a managed service, over time, you begin to lose insight into what is happening in that services, what is happening in our systems. And after a while, that becomes uncomfortable. We as a bank need to have ownership and responsibility. You can outsource many things. You can never outsource accountability. So understanding what's really happening in the box was very critical to us. So
Robin,
these are the
Sorry, Robin, can I just take a step back? And just because we know that the audience for these things often can be from people who've got a lot of experience in this area, people that are learning. Can you just cover a little bit what you mean by technical debt, just so we've got everyone up to the same place?
Well, technical debt is any technology that for some reason isn't up to date, and it depends what technology that is. So often it's about versions of software, versions of middleware, versions of hardware. It could be related to patching, but generally it's versioning. We're on an old version of this system or this operating system or this database, and we need to upgrade it. And those upgrades are usually or very often quite painful. And the longer we leave it, often the more painful they are. And it costs money. And it doesn't cost money to install a new Windows operating system particularly, but it costs money to do all the testing work surrounding all the applications that sit on that. So it, as I say, it consumes budget for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and probably mealtime snacks in between as well.
Brilliant, thank you.
So to pick up the story, these were some of the challenges that we had, and we needed to move to an operating model which was a little bit more dynamic, address some of these issues, but of course without losing what we had before. Stability, extremely important. It's always been our number one priority, always will be our number one priority. Secure and stable operations, but also without increasing the cost. So we needed to move to a model that is more DevOps, end-to-end ownership. But before we could do that, within the bank, we needed to look at our sourcing setup. We realized we would not be able to do that with a horizontal model. We would not be able to do that based on purely managed services, and we would not be able to do that purely based on a project-based funding model. So we needed to change a lot of things, including our sourcing picture.
That's brilliant. And I think that you've learned a lot of lessons. I think what we're going to focus on next is some of the key lessons that you've learned through this process, and then we can always then cover about where you've ended up, because I'm sure that will be the question in people's minds. But if we look at some of the key lessons that you've learned for going through this process, I think that these will probably resonate with much of the audience. And again, if the audience have got any comments or you disagree with any of those, we love a bit of disagreement on these LinkedIn Lives. So if you don't think any of these are potentially an issue, but obviously you can't really tell Robin he didn't learn it if he's actually something he's learned. But if there's any areas that you feel like you'd like to debate a bit more or challenge, then please put it in a chat. But Robin, what were some of the key learnings that you found through this process?
Yeah, as I say, so having understood we needed to change our sourcing model, our operating model, and then saying, well, we need to change our sourcing model to support that. The first thing we did, so well, what have we learned along the way? And one of the key things that we've learned is that management attention moves mountains. If you get the management from your vendors really on board and really supporting you, magic happens. And why does magic happen? And this is the key theme that I'm going to come up, is because they bring the right people in. And this whole sourcing thing is a people game. Which brings me on to the next one. Size matters. Well, why does size matters? Size matters because the bigger you are and the bigger deal you have, the more management attention you're going to get. And then the mountain's going to move, the right people are going to come in. So these are very, very, very linked, as is the third one. Relationships exist between peoples, not organizations. People often say, well, we have a great relationship with this supplier or this organization. It's nonsense. You don't. You have a great relationship between individuals at management level and at mid-management level and on the ground. That's where the relationships are. So these three are very much tied together and were fundamental to the way we worked with our sourcing landscape and our models.
And Robin, just on the management attention moves mountains, when I first read that, I did wonder, I get the fact that that's from your providers or your suppliers. Is that also your own management as well? Did you enlist the support from your own senior management at the top level so they understood what was going on and there may be some bumps in the road? How did you sort of engage with some of your internal stakeholders?
It works in that dimension as well. I very much meant it in terms of is getting the vendor management on board for specific activities, for specific things you're doing. But it is critical in everything you do. You need your own management to buy into this as well, whatever it is you're doing. So yeah, I agree. You can take it in different dimensions.
And just on size matters, sorry, I'm now peppering you with questions. And again, if the audience have got any questions, let us know. And I'm sure Ricky will jump in as well. But in terms of size matters, do you have an approach in terms of, do you want to be the biggest with a particular provider? Do you want to be sort of like with providers of small and agile? What's your approach in terms of size matters? I know you might want the attention, so you want to be big in that provider. But would that mean that you wouldn't look at some of the biggest providers in the world because you want to be a large player for them? How did that shape your thinking in terms of size matters?
So in terms of what it did for us at this time is we had a number of what we called strategic partners, and they were all big players in. But we also realized the evolution was DNB was going to play a bigger role. Things like cloud come along. We also said we will use niche players. And we realized that the pieces of pie that all of those vendors would get, all our suppliers would get, would shrink. So our strategic partners, great, we can say that, but are we still their strategic customers? So we realized that we needed to consolidate somewhat. So at least the piece of pie that we have to offer, and we can't make ourselves a bigger organization, the piece of pie we have to offer is bigger and more tasty, even though it's going to shrink in general because of, as I say, cloud, the work we're going to do and the models we're going to move in. DNB is going to be more involved. So that was really the effect that it had in 2018.
Brilliant. And just a shameless plug, if people are interested in sort of the being the sort of the customer of choice, we do have a webinar next week actually on the 20th, which is called Becoming the Customer of Choice, which covers some of that in terms of when you're fighting for airtime with your service providers or your suppliers, how you can get yourself as the customer of choice. So if you're interested in this topic, then please join the webinar next week. Sorry, shameless plug, I know, but that's what I'm here to do. No, I'm joking. But sorry, Ricky, go ahead.
I think Robin, on the first point, very pertinent, right? Management attention moves mountains. I think that's a desirable position for every client to be in, to have a very be in a very good position with your vendor. But I think it's easier said than done. So could you share some best practices in terms of how you were able to do some of that? Anything that worked well for you in terms of getting that attention from the top management, from the vendor? Because we keep hearing from clients who say that our client partner keeps churning every year, account management team keeps changing every 2 3 years, and that's why what it does is basically brings in a lot of friction in the relationship between the vendor and the client. So is there some things that you've done which have helped you get that right attention from your vendors?
One thing is just time and energy put into it. I think it is engaged with the highest level in the vendor organization you can possibly manage, and get that attention. I think part of that is also the attention from your management. If your CEO is prepared to go and meet someone from a big vendor organization, that makes a big difference than if you were only prepared to send your middle management over. Going and spending time on site, if this is an offshore provider, again, is extremely important, and being visible. So these are small things that happen, and we've already said it. The size that you can offer. Of course, there is always a desire from vendors to see the opportunity to grow within your organization, and they've got a big footprint, but they want a bigger footprint, and that may not always be realistic because at some point you are saturated. So, but these are some of the things that I think are important.
Absolutely, makes sense. Thank you so much. Right.
So I don't know if you want me to continue, but I can.
Yes, please, Robert. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
carry on. I think that the next 4 bullet points are actually really apt as well, and then we can chip in with questions or comments.
So the next one size doesn't fit all. I described the model that we had where we defined very, very clearly what application maintenance was, and application development, application operations. And of course, you realize across this diverse landscape that I said we have, is that it isn't really the same everywhere. And however many times we tried to tune it and redefined it for this particular set of applications, this particular value chain, it wasn't right for somewhere else. So not only in sourcing, but in all our operating model now, this is something we really understand. One size doesn't fit all, so you need to have a model that has this flexibility in it. So that's not so much vendor sourcing specific, but more generally. And the next 3, I think, are very vendor specific. You can't force a vendor to do something they either can't do or they won't do or isn't in their interest to do. And we've made this mistake sometimes, saying, well, we'd like you to do this, and they've given us the hints and we've ignored the hints, and actually we're right or wrong. It's just not going to happen. There's no point in believing it is. The next one, to badly misquote the Rolling Stones, you don't always get what you pay for, but you never get what you don't pay for. So the idea that you can do some magic deal and get something for nothing just doesn't exist. If you're dealing with a serious organization, trust me, they're better at crunching the numbers than you are. Doesn't mean to say you shouldn't negotiate hard, doesn't mean to say you shouldn't dig down, because you don't always get what you pay for. You may pay too much for it, but there is no such thing as a free lunch. And I absolutely believe that. So there is a point, if you pay less, you will get less. It's as simple as that.
And Robin, on that point, sorry, because I know you talked about, obviously, you can push the vendors. If they can't do it, then there's no point. You can't force them to do something they can't deliver. But then also, you're never going to get what you don't pay for. Having worked with a lot of stakeholders in my procurement and sourcing career as well, often there's expectations from your internal stakeholders, though, that procurement and sourcing could just work magic and you can just tell them to do it because we're a big customer. Did you come across that? I mean, what were your stakeholders feedback or input as you went through this? We talked about getting senior management attention right at the start, but as you went through this process, what was the interaction with stakeholders like? And were they on board with what you were trying to do, or was there any conflict there?
I think it's a maturing process for the whole organization, and I think people begin to understand that it is easy to come in with the sort of the brute force thing, and we're going to put the toughest SLAs in the world in there, and we're going to have penalties on the SLAs, and we're going to do all these great things. But I think we're able to exemplify well enough how this doesn't work. I mean, remember the one thing: no service has ever been delivered by a contract or an SLA. It's delivered by people. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. If you break it down into the fundamentals, that's what happens. So yes, there are forces in the organization that believe this can be a paper-based exercise, but it doesn't matter what you write in the contract, and it does nobody any good to be going back and say the contract is broken. The fact is, you have not got a service that you need, and as I said, who's accountable for that? Who has to face the customers or the regulators? It's not the service provider. It's you, the bank. So and there's no point in saying, well, we had a nice contract with them, or we had, they promised to do it. It doesn't matter. So you really need to understand that whatever service you think you get is actually deliverable. It is actually possible, and whoever's delivering has the wherewithal to do it. Full stop.
Yeah, we used to often have the approach of, like, if you have to pull the contract out, you've already lost, really, because there's either you've got conflict with the vendor and you've not managed the relationship, or you've missed what you're trying to deliver. But pulling the contract out, it's often too late to do that. So I think that sort of aligns to the way that we used to work in the past as well.
Yeah.
And finally, I'm sure the audience. So I was going to say, I'm sure the audience, and I know we've got quite a few vendors on this call as well. I'm sure they'll be shocked to know that there aren't imperfect. There are only imperfect vendors and imperfect customers. I'm sure that as a customer in the past, I would expect that I was perfect, of course, and I'm sure the vendors on here think they are, but they're very tongue in cheek. But be interested, So your view is that there aren't anyone who's perfect, and I think we'd all agree with that. But vendors and customers alike are equally flawed.
Yeah, I have to credit with a colleague with this quote, but I think it's very apt. It's a people game. It's a people game, and as soon as you say people, who says they're a perfect person? So the way we interact with our vendors is not always. We don't always get the best out of them, and the way they react, they interact with us, we don't always get the best out of them. And we see it, all the time in across the board. Some places things work better than others, and it's usually down to people and how people work with each other. So back to what I said before, relationships exist between people, not organizations.
Yeah, that's brilliant. So I think you've had some really good learning. So where have you ended up? It'll be interesting to the audience, I'm sure, to sort of understand what have you ended up with, how that journey sort of getting to that point. I'm sure it's not the end. Journey is never completed, as they say. But where are you now, and how's that working?
So where we are now is, as I indicated before, we found we wanted to have a more integrated operating model. We didn't believe that the managed services would provide that. So we've opted for a co-managed model, which we use with our vendors. So yeah, everyone knows the model on the left, staff augmentation. We just grab some people, body shopping, plenty of other names for that. We all know the one on the right, the managed service. If done really cleanly, we don't really see into the box. We don't really see the people who are delivering the services. We talk to the management. We discuss with the management what we want. We order the service, and the service comes, and we don't see the people behind it. The co-management model in between is where, yes, we take the people, yes, we combine them into the one team, but both we and the service provider have a real responsibility for the delivery of that team. We follow up the same KPIs, the same OKRs, whatever our methodology is. But there is that buy-in from both sides that of this team, whether it's a small team or a wider organization, this is the objective, and we're both accountable. No, we're accountable, but we're both responsible for that, for those objectives and for delivering. And although I put it in the middle, the truth is it doesn't sit in the middle. It's a sliding scale. So the way we use it, we have some areas where it's closer to the left and some areas where it's closer to the right. But it still has that fundamental thing that we have two organizations who are both responsible for making this work.
I think going by what you just described, I think this would probably give the organization DNB much more control over what goes on in the IT organization, because there's another problem, there's another complaint that especially clients in the financial services sector, banks especially, have at times, is that we don't have enough control over what is doing. So at times they will outsource their operations but retain engineering in-house because they believe that way they can exert more control over their IT organization. I think moving to that co-managed model, I presume, would mitigate some of those issues around not having enough control over what goes on inside.
Absolutely, and you know, as I said before, any of these models, you can't outsource accountability. You are always accountable. So you need the model where you feel able to take that. And as I said before, in the managed service model, after a while, you do start to lose sight of what's happening under the bonnet, in the engine there, under the hood. And that's not something you want to do. And probably I would say in a financial services sector, but that probably goes for any industry sector. You don't really want to lose control of things that are so fundamental to your business. And I think that's another point in terms of the evolution of things. I mean, we've said for years, you know, don't outsource your core business. Outsource what isn't your core business. Well, we're a bank. Now, tell me that technology is not our core business. Technology is so much part of our core business that we must have control of it. So, and the world is changing. The world is changing, and what we think, you know, what we would have had as managed service now, we have as a service. We have software as a service, we have platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. So those things that really are commodity are coming as a service, and everything that we build on top of those things is our business, and therefore we need to have, as you say, complete control of.
I'd just like to bring up a comment that's been made in the chat from Geeta, who sort of said, as long as it's people dependent, there are bound to be issues. It has to be people independent in the digital world. I'm not sure of your view on that, Robin. I mean, I would slightly disagree that I don't think we're ever going to be completely independent in any world, because there are people that are going to be required to do a lot of this heavy lifting and the design and the strategy. So I think I get what Geeta's saying. I don't know if your view on that in terms of if you could totally make it people independent.
So you know, back to what I said, there is stuff that is commodity, and we're beginning to see in our industry, I think, really a better definition of what commodity and the services that are delivered. And we have commodities, we have electricity, and we don't really think of the people who are working in the power stations and things like that. That's a commodity. We're starting to get to that level. But as soon as you're building something on that top of that commodity, you have people involved. And I think to overlook people is, and the importance of people is a big mistake. And all our learning has been that this is all about people.
Yeah, that's great. Another question was actually directly linked to people, actually. So a question from LinkedIn user was, did you have to make changes to the DNB team in order to be prepared to co-manage, given the degrees to which they key capabilities had previously been outsourced? So were there significant changes you had to make to the team?
How to answer that? We have been slowly making changes and evolving the team. It wasn't, you can't switch internal resources like that. That's obvious. But you can see the evolution. we are putting more engineers. We are onboarding more engineers into our setup, and you see different people are flourishing in this. So yes, there is an evolution of our own organization, and that needs to continue. We've got a lot further to go. We're not there, but that's absolutely right.
Okay, great. So just encourage, as we look to sort of come towards the end of this, if there are any other questions, please get them in. Ricky, I know you had a few questions that you wanted to cover. Have you covered all yours, or a couple more? I've got one last one for Robin in a minute, but let's get your questions out.
Okay. I think when you started this journey moving from this to sort of a co-manage and DevOps based model, did you sort of set some key success criteria? I think you articulated some challenges that you had in the previous model in terms of technical debt, less agility. So did you set out that, okay, if these are my key success criteria, and if I were to meet at least let's with the top three, I would say that this model is working well for us, at least in the near term.
So yes, we did. The simple answer is we did. And one of the might seem backward looking, but one of course the key success factors was that we didn't lose the stability that we had earlier. And whereas everyone could see the potential benefits of being more productive, people were worried that we would lose stability. Actually, we've increased stability. So this has been very positive. The other one is in terms of productivity, and we probably, like everybody else, spends a lot of time scratching our heads and saying, how do we really measure productivity? And we have a number of different ways of doing it. But we are seeing everything we're really able to look at, that we are moving in the right direction in terms of productivity. So keeping that stability, absolutely key, always will be, and increasing our productivity. The third one, which I think is very, very difficult to measure in any sensible way, is we wanted to close the gap between IT and business. We wanted to bring those closer together. I think we've succeeded in some areas. I think in other areas we still have a lot of work to do, and that work will carry on.
That's brilliant. Over to you, Dave. I think you had some questions.
Well, it was really just the last question I was going to sort of round it out with, which was, so where do you see, we've talked about this journey, where do you see the next stages of the journey going? What's next for you and the DNB team?
So I think we're in, I talked about this change in 2018. The world has changed dramatically since 2018. We've had COVID, and we have geopolitical movements, which are some things we couldn't imagine. So our challenges have changed. During COVID, the world became very mobile. Work from anywhere became very very prevalent. On the flip side, our regulators get tougher. The geopolitical situation we have now exacerbates that. So don't work from everywhere. Work from as close to Norway and in Norway as possible become some of the mantra. So these two things work in opposing directions. So I think some of the things that are going to be really important coming forward are geography. How we can use models that are adaptive to geography. I think that's going to be very important. I'm sure the co-management model is going to evolve. I don't believe we will go back to managed services. We may use it in niche areas, but essentially, I think that co-management model must develop further. So these are the things that I think we will keep pushing on. But there is a war for talent out there. And we need to keep evolving ourselves to keep ahead of the game.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I did a presentation this morning, actually, which was looking at some of the attrition of some of the leading IT service providers. And it is peaking, I think, but interesting where it goes in the future with the touted recession on the horizon in some countries. I know not all countries. And so it's definitely something we're keeping a close eye on at Everest Group in terms of how do we see this happening, the war for talent, and the great resignation that we've done a lot of coverage on in the last few months and years, I think is really going to sort of something that everyone's watching to see where that goes for the future. Are you seeing that other parts of DNB from a procurement and sourcing perspective are following similar models? I know IT sourcing is one of the most complex areas, but are other areas of DNB following similar models?
I think so much the largest part of our sourcing is around technology that's dominated. We don't do so much business outsourcing. So the answer is I can't really see that.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I don't see any more questions. So I think that this has been a great session. So thank you, Robin. If there's any last minute questions, please get them in quickly as I'm wrapping up. But thank you, Robin, and thank you, Ricky. Really appreciate your time, Robin, especially. Ricky and I get paid to do this, but you've done this to showcase some of the skills and lessons that you've learned. So we really appreciate you taking the time and sharing it with the audience, because I do know that people in procurement sourcing really value hearing from other people and what they've done and their real life lessons. And so really appreciate you taking the time to do it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Robin.
thank you,
Thank you so
Ricky.
much for your time.
And just for the audience, as you start logging off, don't forget, if you are interested in being a customer of choice, then join our webinar next week. But thank you for your time, and reach out to any of us if you've got any questions. Thank you very much.